When family turns against family, the courtroom becomes more than just a battle for justice. It becomes a battlefield of betrayal. In a shocking twist during the ongoing YNW Melly case, the rapper's own family has publicly slammed YNW Bortlen, Melly's longtime friend and co-defendant. Once brothers in music, they're now enemies under oath. The tension was electric as Melly's mother and other relatives made explosive statements that shook the courtroom walls. What was once loyalty and trust has crumbled into accusations, suspicion, and heartbreak. This isn't just about music anymore, it's about survival, truth, and legacy. The people who once shared the same dream are now pointing fingers, each fighting to clear their name while dragging the other deeper into chaos. What, really, happened between YNW Melly and YNW Bortlen? Why is Melly's family turning their backs on the man who once called Melly brother? Is this the final crack in the YNW empire, or just another desperate attempt to save face before the verdict drops? Stick around, because we're diving deep into the courtroom drama that has left fans speechless. The music world divided and a family completely torn apart. This is more than just a trial. It's the unraveling of a brotherhood built on fame, loyalty, and tragedy. From the outside, the YNW crew looked unbreakable, young, talented, and rising from the Florida streets with nothing but dreams and determination. YNW Melly, whose real name is Yamel Demons, became one of the most talked about rappers in the industry after the release of Murder on My Mind, a haunting track that blurred the line between art and confession. Alongside him was his close friend and brother-in-arms, YNW Bortlen, real name Cortland Henry. Together, they represented loyalty and pain, struggle and triumph until tragedy struck in the most unimaginable way. In 2018, the world of YNW came crashing down. Two of their closest friends, YNW Juvie and YNW Sakasar, were killed. Initially, Bortlen claimed the deaths were the result of a drive-by shooting. But investigators soon uncovered evidence that told a very different story. Phone records, ballistic reports, and surveillance footage began to suggest that the shooting might have been staged. That revelation changed everything. It turned friends into suspects, and the bond between Melly and Bortlen began to fracture under the weight of suspicion. Inside the courtroom years later, that fracture became an open wound. YNW Melly's family, who once treated Bortlen like their own, could no longer hide their anger. As the trial dragged on, Melly's mother, Jamie Demons King, was seen visibly emotional, shaking her head during Bortlen's statements. At one point, she even mouthed the words, "You lied," toward him. A gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the media or the jury. For fans who grew up seeing these young men as brothers, the sight was heartbreaking. Bortlen had once been the one standing by Melly's side, visiting him, defending his name on social media, and keeping the YNW legacy alive. But in the courtroom, it was different. Every word that came from Bortlen's mouth seemed to push the Demons family further away. When he took the stand, his tone was calm, but his words carried weight, especially when he described events from the night of the murders. According to reports, Bortlen's testimony contradicted earlier statements that had been made by both the defense and the prosecution. His version of the story raised new questions, ones that pointed to potential deception or betrayal. 2. Melly's family, it felt like Bortlen was throwing Melly under the bus to save himself. To others, it looked like he was simply telling the truth, no matter who it hurt. The courtroom atmosphere was tense. Each time the defense cross-examined Bortlen, there was a feeling of electricity, an unspoken acknowledgement that this was no longer a legal fight, but a moral one. Could a friendship survive when both men's freedom was on the line? Could loyalty exist in a world where every sentence could mean life or death? Melly's family made their feelings clear outside the courthouse. In emotional interviews, they expressed disappointment and anger at what they perceived as betrayal. One relative was quoted saying, "He's acting like he don't know Melly anymore. But we remember who fed him, who brought him up." These weren't just casual comments, they were the cutting words of people who felt abandoned. For the fans, social media became the new battleground. Hashtags like #FreeMelly and #JusticeForMelly clashed with others defending Bortlen's position. Some argued that Bortlen had no choice but to speak truthfully, even if it made Melly look bad. Others accused him of being the reason the case was dragging on, of manipulating facts to appear innocent. The digital storm only mirrored the emotional chaos in court. The truth is, the YNW crew's story has always been bigger than just music. It's a reflection of loyalty, pain, and how quickly fame can tear apart even the closest relationships. These were young men who came from nothing, who built a movement that meant something to people around the world. Their songs weren't just lyrics, they were testimonies of struggle, violence, and survival. Yet the same world that once celebrated their bond was now watching it collapse in real time. What made it even more painful was the history between Melly and Bortlen. They weren't just collaborators. They were like brothers. They had been through poverty, street life, and success together. They had shared hotel rooms, tour buses, and recording booths. Bortlen had been the one managing logistics, protecting Melly from distractions, and standing beside him during the early fame days. So when accusations arose that he might have turned against Melly, the disbelief was palpable. In the courtroom, those who knew them best said it felt surreal, like watching a family disintegrate from the inside. Bortlen avoided eye contact with Melly's family for most of his time on the stand. His words were measured, but the impact was devastating. The prosecution pressed him on inconsistencies in his statements, while the defense tried to paint him as unreliable. Every minute was a tug-of-war between versions of the truth by the time court adjourned that day. The atmosphere was heavy. The Demon's family walked out silently, while reporters swarmed around them, shouting questions about their reaction. They didn't answer. They didn't need to. Their faces told the story, a mixture of pain, anger, and disbelief. What once began as a musical brotherhood had now turned into a legal and emotional war. As one journalist put it, the YNW brand, used to mean Young Na World, now it feels like Young Na War. In many ways, part one of this story isn't just about a courtroom argument. It's about how success, fame, and tragedy can destroy even the strongest of bonds. It's about the fragile nature of trust when freedom is at stake. And for YNW Melly's family, it's about watching someone they once loved as a brother become a stranger under the harsh lights of a courtroom. The next part of this saga digs deeper into why this betrayal hurts so much, what it means for Melly's case, and how the truth might finally come to light. The courtroom wasn't just a stage for justice, it had become a stage for heartbreak. Every word spoken carried the weight of years of loyalty, music, and shared pain. As the case unfolded further, it became painfully clear that YNW Melly's family was no longer holding back their emotions toward YNW Bortlen. They were done with silence. They wanted the world to know how betrayed they felt by the man who had once been like a son, a brother, and a protector. During one of the trial sessions, tensions reached their breaking point. Witnesses described Melly's mother's reaction as devastatingly raw. When the prosecution replayed phone recordings between Melly and his associates, her expression shifted between disbelief and anger. But when Bortlen's name came up, something inside her seemed to snap. According to onlookers, she whispered something under her breath, clutching her hands tightly as if trying to stop herself from yelling. It wasn't the rage of a stranger, it was the heartbreak of a mother watching her family's world fall apart. For years, May Demons King had defended both Melly and Bortlen. She had gone online, fighting off critics, protecting the YNW legacy, and insisting that her son and his crew were innocent. But as the details of the case continued to unravel, the once solid foundation of trust began to crumble. She started to see Bortlen not as the loyal friend he used to be, but as someone who might be prioritizing his freedom over the truth. The public didn't need to read court documents to feel the shift. They could see it on social media. Posts, tweets, and comments from Melly's family began to carry a sharper tone. They weren't hiding their frustration anymore. One cryptic post read, "You can't sit at our table if you're the reason we starving." Fans immediately connected the dots, believing it was aimed at Bortlen. The message was clear. The family had turned the page on forgiveness. Meanwhile, Bortlen was walking a fine line. On one hand, he still carried the YNW name. It was tattooed into his identity, his career, and his life. On the other, he was under immense legal pressure, facing charges that could end his career entirely. To the world, he was both a friend and a potential traitor, depending on who you asked. Every statement he made, every facial expression in court, was analyzed like lyrics in a song. In interviews, legal experts discussed the growing tension between the two sides. Some suggested that Bortlen might have been encouraged by his lawyers to distance himself from Melly in order to strengthen his own defense. Others speculated that there was more behind the scenes, maybe deals, maybe secrets, things that could never be said aloud in court. The prosecution appeared to take advantage of this fracture, subtly emphasizing differences between Melly and Bortlen's accounts. The goal was simple, to make them turn on each other completely. And it was working. What made the situation even more tragic was how deeply intertwined their lives once were. Before all this, the YNW crew wasn't just making music, they were building a movement. They represented young Black artists from small towns fighting to break into an industry that often ignored them. Their bond wasn't built in studios, it was built in shared hunger, late-night drives, and mutual dreams. But fame is a dangerous gift. It gives you everything you ever wanted, and then it tests whether your soul can survive it. By the time Melly's arrest made headlines in 2019, the Brotherhood had already been under pressure. The music world had its eyes on him. Labels were calling, and fans were hungry for more. But behind the scenes, jealousy, fear, and paranoia were spreading. People whispered that money had come between them, that some felt left out while others were living large. Those same whispers grew louder after the murders of Juvie and Sakasor, and when Bortlen and Melly were both accused. What had once been rumors became accusations. In part 2 of this saga, we see the human side of fame, the part that doesn't make the charts or the headlines. It's the part where mothers cry in courtrooms, where friendships rot under pressure, and where every decision feels like a lose-lose. Melly's family wasn't just grieving for the 2 lives lost in 2018. They were grieving the loss of their son's innocence, his reputation, and now the brotherhood that had once protected him. The most haunting part of it all is that there may never be a clear truth. In murder cases like this, truth often gets tangled between fear, loyalty, and survival. What's said in court may not always align with what really happened on the streets. But to the Demon's family, one thing is certain: Bortlen's actions, both in the past and in the courtroom, have deepened their wounds as the trial progressed. The defense team for Melly worked tirelessly to show inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. They argued that much of the evidence was circumstantial, that investigators had made assumptions, and that the story being told wasn't the full picture. But even as the defense fought back, the emotional divide between Melly's family and Bortlen remained impossible to ignore. Outside the courthouse, fans gathered with signs blasting Melly's songs and chanting for his release. "Free Melly" echoed through the streets, mixed with news crews capturing every moment. The irony was painful. The same music that had once united people was now playing in the background of a story about separation and loss. Reporters followed Bortlen as he left court, asking him whether he had betrayed his brother. He stayed silent, wearing dark glasses and a stiff expression. But silence in moments like this speaks volumes. Inside, Melly himself sat expressionless, staring straight ahead. His eyes didn't follow Bortlen, his lips didn't move. Some say he looked calm. Others say he looked cold. Maybe he had simply accepted that the brotherhood was gone. That loyalty doesn't survive in cages and courtrooms. By this stage, even those closest to the case began to acknowledge that the YNW brand might never recover. Record labels that once showed interest grew distant. Promoters stopped mentioning Melly's name. And as for Bortlen, his career was in limbo. Every song, every post, every move was now tied to a case that had defined his life. Yet beneath all the chaos, there's one painful truth. None of this was supposed to happen. These young men were supposed to change their lives through music. They were supposed to rise together, not fall apart in the public eye. As part 2 closes, the world waits for answers, but in this story, answers come slow and trust dies fast. What happens next could either seal YNW Melly's fate or rewrite everything we think we know about that night in 2018. As the final days of the trial approached, the tension surrounding YNW Melly and YNW Bortlen's names reached a fever pitch. The courtroom, once filled with anticipation, now felt heavy. Not with curiosity, but with fatigue. Everyone had seen enough to know that this was no longer just about guilt or innocence. It was about trust, betrayal, and the collapse of everything the YNW name once stood for. For the Demon's family, every day in court felt like reliving the same nightmare. The whispers, the photos, the headlines, they were everywhere. Jamie Demon Skeng, Melly's mother, tried to stay strong, but her exhaustion was visible. Every time the camera caught her eyes, they looked distant, almost hollow. She wasn't just watching her son fight for his life. She was watching his world burn down around him when YNW Bortlen took the stand again for cross-examination. The air in the room grew colder. His words were sharp, deliberate, and careful, but the silence that followed each sentence was deafening. He denied certain allegations, clarified others, but in doing so, he painted a picture that made Melly's defense even harder to maintain. It wasn't an outright betrayal in words, but it was one in impact. For Melly's family, this was the moment they fully turned on Bortlen. To them, his calmness was cowardice, his composure a mask. They saw not a man under pressure, but a man choosing himself over loyalty. One relative later said outside the courthouse he could have stood by him, but he didn't. He's protecting himself, not the truth. The judge listened as both sides made their closing arguments. The prosecution emphasized the evidence, the gunshot trajectories, the cell phone data, the alleged staging of the crime scene. The defense countered by pointing out flaws in the timeline, inconsistencies in witness testimonies, and the lack of direct proof tying Melly to the murders. But somewhere in the middle of all the technicalities, humanity of the case became the real story. Because beyond all the reports, what people were really seeing was the destruction of brotherhood. YNW Melly and YNW Bortlen were supposed to represent loyalty through struggle, faith through fame. Their music had spoken to millions about real pain and friendship. Now, the same people who sang their lyrics were divided, some standing with Melly, others with Bortlen. Social media became a war zone, each post another weapon. And as the trial unfolded, the legacy of YNW transformed. What was once a symbol of unity and ambition had become a cautionary tale about the price of fame. It wasn't just the music industry watching, it was every young artist who saw themselves in Melly's story. They saw how quickly success could turn into suspicion, how fast the people you trust can become witnesses against you. One of the most haunting moments came when the courtroom replayed a clip of Melly's own song during evidence review. The haunting chorus of "Murder on My Mind" echoed softly through the speakers. Even the jurors looked unsettled. The irony was unbearable. The song that made him famous now sounded like a confession. But to Melly supporters, it was art, not evidence. They argued that music shouldn't be treated as testimony. Still, the coincidence was too strong for many to ignore. Outside the courthouse, hundreds gathered for the verdict. Reporters, fans, and family members filled the steps, cameras ready, voices tense. Some held up signs that read "Free Melly," while others shouted accusations toward Bortlen. Inside, both men sat only a few feet apart, but worlds away in spirit. They didn't exchange glances. They didn't speak. Whatever bond once existed was long gone. The verdict didn't come easily. It was delayed, debated, and dissected. But while the legal decision would take time, the emotional verdict had already been reached in the hearts of those who once called each other family. Melly's family had made their judgment. YNW Bortlen was no longer one of them. Bortlen was no longer one of them. Yet, beneath all the emotion and anger, there's something deeper that lingers. The YNW story isn't just about murder. It's about the tragedy of wasted potential. These were young men from Gifford, Florida, who beat the odds to find fame only to become consumed by it. Their songs spoke about loyalty. But life demanded they prove it, and that's where everything fell apart. In the days following the trial, documentaries and podcasts began dissecting the case. Everyone wanted to know what really happened that night. Was it betrayal, fear, or a tragic accident turned into a cover-up? The public debated endlessly, but the truth remained trapped within the walls of that courtroom. Tangled between statements, lies, and shattered friendships, Melly's supporters continued to rally, holding on to hope that one day he would walk free. His mother stayed active on social media, defending him and criticizing those she believed had turned against her son. Meanwhile, Bortlen tried to continue his career, releasing music that touched on themes of survival, trust, and regret. But no matter what he released, the shadow of betrayal followed. Every lyric he wrote was dissected for hidden meanings. Every video analyzed for clues. The industry, too, learned a harsh lesson from the YNW case. Record labels that once courted controversial artists became more cautious. The lines between entertainment and real life had blurred too much. The YNW story became a reminder that sometimes the lifestyle that sells records also destroys lives. By the end of this chapter, wasn't just a courtroom case that had ended, it was the end of an era. The YNW brotherhood that once symbolized dreams, loyalty, and the struggle to rise from nothing had shattered into pieces. What remained were broken hearts, ruined reputations, and the haunting question that no one could answer: was it worth it? The lights in the courtroom dimmed as the day concluded. Melly was led back to his cell, silent, his mind heavy with everything he'd lost: friends, freedom, and faith. Bortlen walked out under the weight of public judgment, knowing that no verdict could ever clear his name in the eyes of those who once called him brother. In the end, there were no winners, only survivors. And maybe that's the true tragedy of the YNW story. In a world driven by fame and loyalty, both can vanish faster than a beat drops. As the world moves on and new artists rise. The legacy of YNW Melly and YNW Bortlen remains a haunting lesson, a story of how friendship can become a battlefield, and how even in the pursuit of dreams, betrayal can echo louder than success. Before you scroll away, stop for a second and think about what this story really means. The YNW Melly and YNW Bortlen saga isn't just a courtroom drama, it's a mirror reflecting what happens when loyalty, fame, and ambition collide. It's a tragic reminder that no amount of money, music, or fame can protect you from the consequences of betrayal and broken trust. If you've made it this far, you already know this story goes deeper than headlines. It's about real lives, real pain, and real lessons. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. In a world obsessed with clout, who would really stand by you when everything falls apart? Because when the lights fade, when the cameras stop rolling, when the fans disappear, the only thing left is the truth. Don't let this just be another viral case you scroll past. Stay informed, stay aware, and look beyond the surface. Every artist, every fan, and every person chasing a dream needs to understand that fame without loyalty is just an illusion. If you found this breakdown powerful, hit that follow, share this story, and join the discussion. Let's talk about loyalty, justice, and the dark side of the music industry. Because the YNW story might be ending in court, but its message about trust, brotherhood, and betrayal will echo forever. This isn't the end of the conversation. It's just the beginning. Are you ready to face the truth? The truth?